Hi guys, my name is Kayla. I am a birth doula and I'm going to be talking about my second delivery. A bit of a backstory. We tried to conceive for a year for him and we also had a miscarriage in that time, so he was also my rainbow baby. So then fast forward, 37 weeks and 6 days is when I gave birth to my first baby, and so I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to go in between there. I'm not going to make it to 38 weeks. I made it to 38 weeks. I was actually very pissed because I was like, I've never made it to 38 weeks. Why am I at 38 weeks? I was livid because I was so done with pregnancy. 38 weeks and 2 days rolls around. I start having contractions every 10 minutes all day long. They're getting closer together, but they also start spacing out, and then they go away for about an hour and then they come back and then they go away. This is called prodromal labor. I actually had prodromal labor all the way from 34 weeks. So I'm timing contractions all day long. They're still very far apart. And then around 10 p.m., they start getting closer together. They become like 8 minutes apart, 5 minutes apart. And then they stay around 4 to 5 minutes apart the entire time. Until about 1 o'clock a.m., I woke my husband up from his sleep and woke my daughter up. We brought my daughter to the hospital because we weren't sure if this was the real thing. This was also before the whole pandemic shut down. So 1:30 a.m., we get to the hospital and I am 4.5 centimeters dilated and about 80% phased. My daughter was still there at this point. About 2 o'clock, so about a half hour after we get there, my husband decides to drive my daughter to my in laws. And that's where she would stay for the duration of our stay. At 3:05 a.m., I was checked and I was still 4 to 5 centimeters dilated. So I wasn't dilating much. I was phasing a little bit. And so they wanted to call my doctor to see exactly what to do with me. During this time, they took me off of the monitors and let me get into the bath where I would be able to relax and let my body do what it needs to do. I was in the bath for about 15 minutes when my contractions were getting even stronger. I called my nurse into the room and I was like, I'm in so much pain. Like, can you give me something? Like, at this point, I was begging for anything. So because of this, she decides to check me and I was 5 centimeters dilated, so I was officially admitted. At this time, I asked for the epidural. It takes a while for the anesthesiologist to get in there. At 4:20 a.m., I got my IV. At 5 o'clock a.m., I got my epidural. The anesthesiologist came in, gave me the epidural, and there was absolutely no complications with that. I highly recommend an epidural, I really do. About 15 minutes after my epidural was in, they put the catheter in me, and I didn't feel it at all. Usually they do it after the epidural so that you don't feel the catheter going in. About 40 minutes after my epidural was placed, I started feeling nauseous, which is a very common thing with the epidural. 6 o'clock a.m., my nurses couldn't get the monitors to show my contractions, so they were flipping me from side to side trying to figure out what is going on with the monitors. I was still having contractions, but they could not see them on the monitors. At 7:35, I had what I believe is the fetal ejection reflex. I was feeling so much pressure all of a sudden. So I called my nurse in there and they were like, okay, you're about 8.5 centimeters dilated. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I started itching. That is also a very common symptom with the epidural. At 9 o'clock, my midwife came in and broke my water just to see if that would help me progress. Also, in between these times, I was taking naps. Definitely highly recommend taking naps if you have an epidural. At about 10:10, my midwife came in and she says that I wasn't dilating anymore and I was still stuck at an 8. I had been 8 for about 4 hours, and so they wanted to start me on Pitocin. It was all up to me if I wanted to actually do that. So I decided, yes, let's start the Pitocin. Let's just get this over and done with. At 10:30, I felt the fetal ejection reflex again. I was definitely not feeling a whole bunch of my epidural anymore. I could move my body however I wanted to, and I definitely don't know what was going on. So at 10:30, I was still 8 centimeters dilated, but the baby had gotten lower. At about 10:45, my midwife came in again and she said, you're just not dilating anymore. I don't know what's going on, but we can manually dilate you while you're pushing. That is essentially where you push and the midwife just kind of moves the cervix out of the way. So at 10:50, I start pushing. My midwife is pulling my cervix out of the way while I'm pushing, and about maybe 1 minute later, the cervix is completely gone. So after that cervix is completely gone, it is now time to make the baby descend completely down into the birth canal. And so that was horrible. Let's just be real. I felt the ring of fire. Yes, I had an epidural. I was not feeling any of the contraction pain at all. I honestly don't even know if I was having contractions at that point because they still weren't able to get my contractions on the monitor. Wow, I need to breathe. Once that ring of fire hit, it was so incredibly hard to push because I was absolutely blindsided. I had no clue that you could feel the ring of fire with an epidural. With my first baby, my epidural was so dense that I could not feel anything. So I had no clue that this was even a possibility. So while I was filling the Ring of Fire, my midwife was telling me to do like little tiny pulse pushes, which is where like you do like little pushes. So you're not like fully pushing through that, because if you do that, it will cause you to tear even more. So my baby was born at 10:55 a.m. Later on, I believe it was a week after he was born, we realized that his clavicle broke from coming out. I honestly have no idea how this happened. He was 6 pounds, 13 ounces, so not a big boy at all. And there was not even a shoulder dystocia, so I have no idea how that happened. His cord was wrapped around his neck, so the midwife had to like untangle him a little bit. But actually, having the cord wrapped around your neck is actually very common. So yeah, that was my birth story with my second baby. If you guys want to hear any of my other birth stories with any of my 3 babies, let me know.